Good morning and welcome back to In Deep, a nuanced, detailed, dare I say even multifaceted examination of political and cultural topics. I'm Angie Coiro, nice to be with you. Again this week we bring you intelligent voices on provocative subjects this week. Those topics are Roe v. Wade and the continued freedom to choose abortion. In our second hour, civility on the campaign trail and in political discourse. Is that a realistic goal? Should that even be a goal, or do we need to make our points any way we can? California congressional candidate Norman Solomon joins me for that discussion, along with a co-founder of the Institute for Civility in Government. Perfect choice for the hour. But first up, a woman's ever-threatened right to choose to end her pregnancy as guaranteed up through the first 2 trimesters through Roe versus Wade. Now, if there was ever a Supreme Court ruling that deserves the word landmark, this would be it. Ever since the men in black robes handed down the ruling 39 years ago, yes, they were all men, it's been the subject of protests, more court cases, assaults, assassinations. It is law. It is far from settled law. Abortion has played a relatively small part in the presidential campaign so far. Of course, there's not much happening on the Democratic side. And on the Republican side, we see pretty much what we expected to see, which is to say everyone as quickly and as thoroughly as they can, trying to out-fundamentalist each other, each one holier than the last. And Mitt Romney's done a complete 180. He did, in fact, for many years support choice. You wouldn't know that to listen to him now. One of the more appalling nuggets to come out this week was this little goodie from CNN. This is Piers Morgan. He's asking Rick Santorum about his stance regarding women who are made pregnant by a rapist.
On abortion, you did harden your position on that as you got older.
Well,
why was that?
Well, life. When I decided to run for public life, I was informed very quickly. People wanted to know what my position on that was. So I actually went through the process of trying to better understand the facts. It became very clear to me that life begins at conception and persons are covered by the Constitution. And since human life is the same as a person, to me it was a pretty simple deduction to make that that's what the Constitution clearly intended to protect.
But do you really believe, let me ask you this, do you really believe in every case it should be totally wrong? In the sense that, I know that you believe even in cases of rape and incest, but you've got 2 daughters. If you had a daughter that came to you who'd been raped and was pregnant, and was begging you to let her have an abortion, would you really be able to look her in the eye and say no as her father?
I would do what every father would do, is to try to counsel your daughter to do the right thing.
It's a sort of,
And
it's an almost impossibly hypothetical thing to ask you, but there will be people in that position who may well share your religious values.
It's not a matter of religious values.
And they're looking at their daughter saying, how can I deal with this? Because if I make her have this baby, isn't it just going to ruin her life?
Well, you can make the argument that if she doesn't have this baby, if she kills her child, that too could ruin her life. And this is not an easy choice. I understand that. As horrible as the way that daughter and son was created, it still is her child. And whether she has that child or she doesn't, it will always be her child, and she will always know that. And so to embrace her and to love her and to support her and get her through this very difficult time, I've always, I believe and I think, the right approach is to accept this horribly created, in the sense of rape, but nevertheless gift, in a very broken way, but gift of human life, and accept what God is giving to you. As you know, we have to, in lots of different aspects of our life, we have horrible things happen. I can't think of anything more horrible, but nevertheless, we have to make the best out of a bad situation. And
how do you equate
that is making.
And now he goes on to, Piers Morgan went on to talk about the death penalty, which is a different topic for a different day. But did you hear how clever he was? Did you hear what he did in there? For those of you just joining us, that was Rick Santorum talking to Piers Morgan on CNN. First talking about abortion as a general topic, and then segueing into what happens when a woman is pregnant by a rapist. Now, Piers Morgan posited that as, what if it were your daughter? And if that were the only context we were talking about, fine by me. What happens between Rick Santorum and his daughter's child is not my business, which is a concept, by the way, that escapes Santorum entirely. But the problem is, he's not talking about his daughter only. He's talking about making decisions for women outside of his family, outside of his acquaintance. All women. All women. Let's listen back to how clever he was because, it's not about religion, but it's about God. He did that. Listen to this. We're going to hear, he slid this in while Piers Morgan was talking. You're going to hear him say that it isn't about religion. And then listen what he says after that.
Values.
It's not a matter of religious values.
And they're looking at their daughter saying, how can I deal with this?
The right approach.
And then we're going to keep him going, and we're going to hear him talk about who else, the guy upstairs.
The right approach is to accept this horribly created, in the sense of rape, but nevertheless gift, in a very broken way, but gift of human life, and accept what God is giving to you.
Okay, so it's not about inflicting your version of an astral superior super being on people who may not share that view? It's not about that? Uh-huh. The truth outed itself through his own lips, despite his very best efforts. This is about God's gift. Now, if you listen to those two phrases in his answer to the question, he exposes his own beliefs. This is all about religious freedom. That's all Roe v. Wade has ever really been about. Now, granted, you can find the occasional anti-choice activist who's an atheist or a non-religious person who has some other grounds on which they oppose abortion for whatever reason. But in the main, the scary, scary part is that Rick Santorum speaks for the majority of anti-choicers. They want all bodies of all women subject to the rules of their gods. Men, too, because the same people want to dictate the sex lives of men. When you check the polls, there is a great overlap in those who want to dictate abortion laws, those who want to dictate women's reproductive choices to them, and those who want to dictate what happens in the bedroom between two consenting adults. Same people, same groups. And this is about sex, of course. And again, you can never make too much of a generalization. In the minds of some, it is about souls. It is about what they perceive as murder, granted. But for most anti-choice activists, I think Richard Solomon nailed this. This is an opinion piece that ran this week in the Ventura County Star. Now, Richard Solomon is chairman of the Planned Parenthood Action Fund of Santa Barbara, Ventura, and San Luis Obispo counties here in California. In noting the Roe anniversary, he writes, "The far right believes that women should not engage in sex until marriage, with pregnancy as the intended outcome. The assault on abortion is often accompanied with an assault on birth control, age-appropriate sex education, and reproductive health care for women." That is one of the conflicts that we'll be examining in the rest of the hour, is the very people who say they do not want abortion to happen will fight tooth and nail against anything that would prevent an abortion, be it actual sexual knowledge. Did you see the study that came out earlier this week about how little high school and middle school girls know about sex, about how you get pregnant, when you get pregnant, what the myths are about, oh, well, you can't get pregnant this time of month? I mean, it is archaic. It is amazing that young girls believe what they believe. I encourage you to look that survey up. It's very distressing how the pushing of an anti-abortion mentality ban on proper sex education has led to, well, it's led to the obvious, predictable thing, which is young girls who are ignorant of sex. And then they end up pregnant. And then they get harassed on the way into an abortion clinic. It's a no-win situation. Let me get back here to Richard Solomon's piece. He says, "The assault on abortion is often accompanied with assault on birth control, age-appropriate sex education, and reproductive health care for women. The fight, then," he says, "isn't really about abortion. It's about controlling the sexuality of poor and middle-class women by punishing them if they dare to be sexually active and find themselves with an unintended pregnancy. To the social conservatives, these women have chosen to act immorally and must bear the consequences. We say no to being sexually active. Being sexually active," he says, "is an individual choice and a fundamental part of being human that may or may not have moral overtones." Radical thought. Isn't it a radical thought that there are those who engage in sex without moral overtones, without consulting a book of scriptures first? He goes on to say it's up to the individual woman to determine whether to be sexually active, and in doing so, take responsibility for deciding the outcome. Therefore, Roe is about whether we trust women to decide what is best for them. And again, that's an editorial from Richard Solomon of Planned Parenthood, writing in the Ventura County Star newspaper earlier this week. And the mentality he's writing about actually infects millions of Americans, and for all those millions, there are plenty of politicians who either believe the same way. I do believe Santorum is a true believer. I also think he's not terribly bright, but I do believe he's a true believer. But in other cases, at least and perhaps more dangerous, are those who couldn't care less about fetuses or babies or abortion, but will happily push to curb abortion rights in order to garner votes. And there's another thing you should be aware as we have this discussion this hour. There is a divide on the right, and this division is about strategy. One faction believes that all the eggs, you'll forgive the illusion, all the eggs belong in one basket. You fight to make all abortions illegal for all women, period. And you don't do any halfway measures. That is the one and only way, and if this Supreme Court won't do it, you wait until the Supreme Court will do it. You don't weaken the argument by doing half measures first. But the second faction on the right concedes that there is no effective challenge to Roe on the horizon, so they're pecking it to death in small bites. They fashion attacks on access, and they've been very successful with this. Very successful with this. There are counties across the U.S. where there are no abortion services. There are more counties across the U.S. where there are extremely limited services, where a doctor will appear once, twice, up to 4 times a month for a day or two. Literally traveling abortionists, so that women can have the full extent of their choice. Once you start assassinating abortion doctors, you might scare a couple people out of the business. So there's this pecking away at access, and they're doing that via the courtroom and the legislatures too. The right of parents to be informed when a teen wants an abortion, even if that parent is demonstrably indifferent or unstable, the teen in some of those instances has the option to go to court on paper. What teenager has the resources and the wherewithal to deal with that? But the real point is, of course, the truth of it is, by the time a teen overcomes the denial that she's pregnant, and you know she can deny that for an awfully long time. Let's say she does overcome denial. Let's say she does start looking for information. Then she gets waylaid by quote-unquote pregnancy outreach groups that are in fact anti-abortionists disguised as prenatal care clinic workers. Then she finds out her rights nonetheless, and their imposed limitations, and she gets up the gumption to stand before a judge to avoid having to tell her abusive parents, well, now she's 7 months in. Now her choice, such as it was, has disappeared. Bingo, no abortion. Mission accomplished. Now, I don't know if you missed it, but about a week before the Roe anniversary, the state of Texas won its fight to force sonograms on pregnant women seeking abortions. It's a win in their column. This is a done deal for the moment. As of this moment in Texas, if I walk into a clinic and I want an abortion, I cannot be assumed to be a cognizant, intelligent, informed adult who has made a reasonable, logical decision. No. I need my daddy, my Big Daddy Texas, to give me a there, to take a picture of the fetus, whether I want that or not, whether I care to pay for that unasked for, unnecessary health care expenditure or not. And then Daddy's going to show me that the fetus looks like a baby. Well, duh. I expected it to look like a ferret. You know, I mean, excuse me if that's flippant on a serious subject, but it is so frustrating. Of course it looks like a baby. It is going to be a baby at some point unless the woman is allowed to exercise her choice. But it's all a game, is what I'm getting at. It's a game of stalling and feinting and blustering and lying, lest a woman be independent of your religious dictates and your moral guidelines. Now here's the real irony. These are the same people who are afraid of Sharia law in the U.S. I guess it all depends on whose God gets to pop up in our legislation. It's okay if it's a Christian God in our legislation. So, after the break, we're going to get an update of abortion rights as the fight stands today from Cristina Page. She's the author of How the Pro-Choice Movement Saved America and a blogger on the Huffington Post. just one more word before the break, and that is about the language choices that I'm going to be making throughout this hour. I am a journalist. Insofar as I can, I try to use the plainest, most accurate language for what I'm trying to get across. Language, of course, is the currency of discourse and spin in the political landscape. So whether we say pro-choice, anti-choice, pro-abortion, anti-abortion, pro or anti-woman, that is a football that is tossed back and forth endlessly. So here's what I believe to be the most accurate term for people who believe in the right of women to control their own reproduction. Pro-choice. Pro-abortion, which is preferred by the right, is in fact inaccurate. And I'm talking about the journalistic sense. It is inaccurate. It's a term used by the right to cloud the issue emotionally. Nobody's pro-abortion. Nobody's out there boosting abortions, trying to foist them on everyone. Nobody's handing these out as party favors. No one is glib about this. No one's an abortion enthusiast. It is a medical procedure. And as a doctor of any kind will tell you, medical procedures are serious. For abortions to be avoided through safe and regular access to effective contraceptives is the ideal. It is the choice we want to preserve. Now, conversely, the fundamentalist religious want to take the right to abortion away. They actively oppose the performance of those medical procedures, and they actively oppose the women having the choice. They want neither of those things. Thus, for this hour and for all other purposes, I use anti-choice and anti-abortion interchangeably. Okay? So keep that in mind as you listen to the rest of the hour. You may not agree with it. After really, thinking it over for many years, this is what I've arrived at. These are the terms that, to me, avoid the spin from both sides to the greatest extent and simply speak the facts. You are pro-choice or you are anti-choice or anti-abortion. Okay? And you know how I made that decision? It was my choice. Stay tuned for a conversation with Cristina Page. I'm Angie Coiro, and this is In Deep. Welcome back to In Deep, looking this hour at the status of abortion rights and access as we observe Roe v. Wade's 39th anniversary. My guest, Cristina Page, is the author of How the Pro-Choice Movement Saved America, published 5 years ago, but still a read that I recommend. She also consults to a number of pro-choice groups, and she writes for the Huffington Post as well. Cristina, welcome to In Deep.
Thank you, Angie. It's great to be on your show.
Well, I almost passed up this whole topic of Roe v. Wade because anniversary shows, it's easy to hook a show on an anniversary. Oh, it's the anniversary of Roe v. Wade. We have to do something. But it's so easy to underestimate how important this is right now. As you've been listening to the candidates talking, I know there's not a whole lot of dialogue on the Democratic side yet. We have an idea of where the Republicans all stand on abortion. But do you feel like this is coming up as a topic to the caliber it deserves, knowing how important this is?
Well, I think even more frighteningly is the comfort level that the GOP candidates have been discussing openly of their positions opposed to contraception as well. These guys, banning abortion is a foregone conclusion. Now they're on deeper. It's about taking away contraception, allowing the states to ban contraception, defining contraception as abortion and banning it, making a fertilized egg, which isn't even a pregnancy, equal in status to a human being in the eyes of the law. This is the stuff they're debating now.
One of the things that's tough for a lot of Americans to separate out, I played in the introduction to the show, I played a clip of Rick Santorum being interviewed. And he says, two statements in very close proximity to each other. He says that, this isn't about religion, it's about the law, but life begins at conception, and you don't really violate God's plan like that. One of the things I don't hear being pointed out very often is this conflation of personal religious beliefs with policy. We don't really hear anybody pointing that out, as to my ears, as frequently as it should be.
Right. Or the fact that for someone like Rick Santorum, the Bible, vetoes, trumps anything that the Constitution says or the Bill of Rights. He answers to that text. not ours. And that's a question that should be posed to him, because the good thing about Rick Santorum is that he's very honest about what he thinks. And so he will admit that, yes, the Bible is more important to him, and his interpretation of the Bible is more important to him than anyone else's in, theology. And yes, it will trump the law, because God's law is the law that he's practicing and wants for all of us. And so, yeah, I mean, I've always been surprised. It seems almost like the media feels that it has to be proper. It has to keep the level of discussion at a place that seems sane, when, in fact, if they just sort of allow for the candidates' positions to speak for themselves, we'd have a much more honest dialogue. And I think the American public's views on who should be running this country would be a lot clearer.
I'm going to expose my complete lack of organization. There was an article that I read when I knew that I was going to call you and be discussing this, and unfortunately I can't dig it up now. But one of the reasons I wanted to discuss it was because it is so frank about what an abortion is, what a quote-unquote partial birth abortion is, saying that in full knowledge it's the right that gave it that name. I have to wonder how much we on the side of choice have been afraid to be very frank about some of the uglier side of what an abortion is. And I don't mean spiritually ugly. I don't mean morally ugly. Any kind of work on the human body is bloody and uncomfortable. And I sometimes hear those who say that abortion should not be a right focusing on what the remains of an abortion looks like. They almost own that argument. And I was so pleased to see this very frank pro-choice article talk about, look, this is an abortion, this is an ugly thing to look at, and so is a tonsillectomy, and so would be, an operation on the liver. And we need to claim this and own it and be honest about it and say, you know what, it doesn't change the facts. It was the first time I had read that perspective. Have you come across that before?
That's not a dialogue I think that we're having in any way. But what you're getting to, the point, I mean, I think everybody believes, we're protecting Roe, and Roe is, lists that there are stages of development gestationally that matter. And by the way, it's the pro-choice side that lives by that ethos. The earlier the better, prevented even better than that. Mm-hmm. We're the ones who have made abortion available in the earliest stages of pregnancy. I mean, it took a decade for us to get in medication abortion, which allows a woman to terminate a pregnancy at 4 weeks, versus before that, which is, around 7 or 8, which also is where most American women terminate a pregnancy, despite the fact that they have funding bans, despite the fact that they have hurdles after hurdle after hurdle thrown in their way, and gauntlets of protesters, and often case, their parents' consent. And so, despite all that, women get in early. They understand that. They want that. They're, determined to make this choice as soon as possible. And so what we see with the pro-life laws, though, is that they don't do anything to, really lower the abortion rate by any measurable, number. But what we do see is that they do throw delays in women's paths. So, for example, after a mandatory delay law was put in books in Mississippi, they saw the second trimester abortion rate increase by 50% in the state. You can understand once you start putting these hurdles in women's paths, how gestationally it goes further and further, and then it gets more expensive, and then it snowballs, and then you're in a bad situation. That's the point. That's the design. And so, when we look at the tactics of both sides, it becomes very clear that for truly pro-life people in this country, those who want to prevent abortion, those who understand the earlier in a pregnancy it happens, it's better. Those people should be with the pro-choice movement because we've done far more in preventing those situations than their side has.
Yeah, in fact, that's something I want to get into this with you. Cristina Page is with us for this hour. She's the author of How the Pro-Choice Movement Saved America, Freedom, Politics, and the War on Sex. She also consults for several national pro-choice groups, and she writes for the Huffington Post as well. See, this does take us back into the discussions that you had in your book, and your book uncovered the ultimate motivations of the anti-choice movement. One of the things that you've hit on in our discussion is that they're anti-contraception. And that right there is a cancer. If you don't want abortions, then it would seem that you would want access to safe and effective contraception. Tell me about what this reveals about their real motivations.
Well, the introduction of contraception and the very soon after that legalization of abortion, in their view, has led to the downfall of the America and the, traditional family and the sort of Christian kind of, lifestyle. And what we see instead is that families are wealthier, families are happier, families are managed and supported to the size that the parents want and can plan. Children have educated mothers. Children are more likely to go on to college. We've halved the poverty rate since the 1950s. I mean, we have polls of married couples in the 1950s listing, their level of happiness was very rare in marriage compared to what polls are today, and that's because they probably mostly got married for unintended pregnancy or in order to have sex, which you couldn't prevent a pregnancy from. Our life, if we list down all of what the pro-choice movement's gains has done to our life and the modernization and equal couples and women in the workplace and it's a laundry list of things that Americans won't do without.
It's as you were saying about whether people are happy or not, and I can hear the very fundamentalist reaction to that would be, you're talking about pleasures of the body. You're talking about pleasures in worldly things, and that is not in service of the greater good. That's not the kind of happiness that counts.
It's in service of intelligent design. So, they can talk, whatever the conversation they want to have with their God about pleasure and the human body, that's that conversation they can have. But I think that
it's
pretty obvious that. Women spend 30 years of their lives, 30 years of their reproductive lives, so ages 15 to 45 are the reproductive years. They spend 27 of that trying to prevent pregnancy artificially. According to opponents of family planning and the Christian fundamentalists, this is a time in which this woman should either be abstaining or open to having children. And so, it is a very different picture of America that we are currently living than what the ideal of, the pro-life establishment is.
Let's talk about the numbers of people who hold that point of view. And we've seen it fluctuate over time. The general trend, and correct me if I'm wrong, the general trend is pro-choice. The general trend is to keep this between a woman and her doctor, but there's a bit of erosion of those numbers when we're talking about later term abortions. Let's talk about how the right has defined quote unquote partial birth abortion and why that's been such a difficulty for the pro-choice movement.
Well, that's it's sort of a discussion that's over. They won. The federal abortion ban is now law. It was upheld by the Supreme Court. And what we haven't seen, is any decline in abortions or the need for abortion in the second trimester. Abortions in the third trimester are virtually non-existent, and if so, are happening in severe cases of anomalies or medical needs to the mother's health and life. And so, really, we're talking about second trimester abortions, And often, physicians, when they're performing these procedures, again, second trimester abortion is also exceedingly rare. About 7% of abortions happen after 20 weeks. And oftentimes, you'll find very compelling reasons for why women are having, terminations late in pregnancy. But even so, what we know is that physicians need the most safe surgical procedures available to them. The procedure that was banned involved fewer passages through the uterine, the uterus and the vagina. And so the fewer times the surgical instrument goes into a person, the better. And that's what it's viewed as for all surgeries. Mm-hmm. So basically what the pro-life movement, based on, the procedure that remains by their standard isn't acceptable either. And so, they basically put onto books a less safe method. And we see this continually. So, for example, they're trying to prevent doctors in residency from, learning how to perform abortions. Well, that only makes sense if abortion's banned, but you haven't done that. And so what they're trying to do, is create unsafe abortions.
Well, they're also, and they're trying, and they're succeeding very much on making abortion, albeit legal, practically unobtainable in many counties of the U.S. Right. What's the proactive way to go after that? I mean, how do we encourage doctors, in the face of, in some cases, even threats of murder, to go ahead and learn how to do abortions and to provide them for the sake of their patients?
Well, the alternative is not acceptable for many physicians. I mean, the reason why abortion is legal was a movement of physicians who said this must stop. And so I think that, physicians are often, they get into this work to save people and to deliver life in the cases of OBGYNs. And so for a lot of them, a miscarriage, is very similar to an elective termination. Mm-hmm. And especially when it's, in the earliest stages, it's easier. Now, the doctors who perform procedures later are specialists. They specialize in much more complicated procedures. And so, the vast majority, 92% of women in this country, are having abortions by around 9 weeks. And that's the procedure that we need physicians to learn safely.
Do they feel, and I don't know how frequently or how often you have the chance to talk to providers, but it seems that the great fear of abortion assassination might have been tempered down a little bit. We haven't had anything for a while. Do you think that is still a factor when a doctor makes a decision to whether to go into this? Is that still a real fear?
Because we haven't had a murder in a while?
Exactly. I mean, I hate to put it so crassly.
I don't know. The Dr. Tiller's murder still feels, very, very recent. Mm-hmm. The face laws that were put on the books during Bill Clinton's administration to protect clinic workers, those did a lot. But at the same time, it's like Gabby Gifford. It's like there are extremists and that are not representative of the vast majority of pro-life people in this country, and those organizations need to police for that, because they're being, attracting the unhinged. And that's it. There were many signs that the murderer of Dr. Tiller was going to be doing that. And, Operation Rescue, he was in close contact with and had their phone number. The only thing on his dashboard was their phone number in his escape vehicle. And so, I wrote a piece about Troy Newman's Facebook friends. Troy Newman's the head of Operation Rescue, and he talks a good game in a press release about being opposed to violence against providers. But, his Facebook friends includes all of the most extreme people in like Army of God who are really, stomping for the unhinged to come forward and kill doctors. That's their whole mission in life. And so, these are 1 degrees of separation, and we have to out that and pro-life people who are reasonable and understand prevention and want to have an open conversation about this, this issue. They need to, expect that of these organizations and demand it.
More with author and activist Cristina Page as we talk abortion rights and access this hour on In Deep on We Act Radio. I'm Angie Coiro. Stick around. This is In Deep. I'm Angie Coiro in conversation this hour with Cristina Page. Her most recent column for the Huffington Post is 16 and Pregnant and Having an Abortion. That is a storyline she's encouraging MTV to incorporate into their 16 and Pregnant reality show. So back to Christine here. We've been talking primarily about America. Let's see how we compare in the larger scheme of things. Are there modern Western countries where abortion is banned outright, or are we kind of an anomaly with the fact that we, try to regulate this at all?
That's right. We are the only industrialized nation that has this, conflict ongoing, brewing. For most of, the world, it's settled onto, and interestingly, paradoxically, the countries on earth that have adopted the strongest pro-choice policies, the dream agenda for the pro-choice movement, which would be, free and easily accessible contraception and accurate and shame-free sex ed, and abortion legal, easily available, in some cases free. Those are the countries that have the lowest abortion rates in the world, compared to, and those are, Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, compared to most of Latin America, where abortion is banned, contraception's difficult to come by, sex ed is, never heard of, and they have the highest abortion rates in the world.
What is the appropriate role, and when you were talking about Latin America, we're talking about largely Catholic countries, what is the appropriate role for churches and religious groups in United States discourse on abortion? What's their appropriate role?
Well, obviously people of faith care about the leadership they get on this issue, but if the leadership is crazed, like they are in the Catholic Church, people who don't have sex and don't have children lecturing to people who do have sex and do have children about what's appropriate. And so, 98% of Catholic women in the United States use artificial birth control. And so, that's a problem the Church has. That's a huge, chasm. And many people who look at the history of the Church think that was probably one of the worst decisions the Church has made, because so many of its flock has, chosen to take the sane path and, plan their families around what they can support. Mm-hmm. And so, it was the first, real break from, following the precepts of the Church. Most churches in this country are pro-choice, though they're becoming more and more scared to admit it. Certainly most, religions, with the exception of the Catholic Church, are pro-contraception and pro-family planning.
Well, let me interrupt you there, because first of all, I want to congratulate you for being the first person on our news show to get us a record amount of email, because I know we're going to hear about the crazed Catholic Church. I just want to thank you for that one. That's going to put us on the books. But the second thing I want to ask you, what are they afraid of? What happens to a church that speaks out and says, you know what, we believe that the choice belongs to the woman? What are they afraid of?
That they'll be consumed by this debate.
Oh.
Like the rest of our public discourse, like the rest. I mean, there's some who believe that these are hot button issues that distract the electorate from the things that really matter. So gay marriage, really, who gives a shit? I mean, they just want to have a family. They just want to be in love. And how does that impact your marriage? And so it's just, this is just kind of drumbeating the electorate into this imaginary fears and voting against their own interest. And so, one, I think that there are churches who understand that the needs of their flock are not these, chimera. They're not, these illusions, on the horizon, and that they need to, focus and get distracted by, but that what's going on in their actual lives. And so I think that rightly, a lot of churches just say, you know what, we're gonna seem neutral on this because, it's not where we want to head.
Yeah, just give the whole issue a pass. How has Barack Obama acted as a pro-choice? I know we knew he was pro-choice on the campaign trail. What do you think about his first 4 years as theoretically a pro-choice president?
I think that his approach to try to find common ground is very revealing of who he is as a politician. I think he believes in the innate goodness and reasonability of people and thinks that if we could simply lower the volume and get people in the room, that we can find, something to agree on. And I think that marks a lot of his policies, and probably a lot what people would say the weaknesses of his administration, because he's not factoring in that there are these ulterior motives, that people don't want women to control their reproductive lives, and that's not something that they're going to agree on.
Well,
I think that there's.
Let me stop you there before we get away from the idea of the Supreme Court. I want to stay with that for a moment, because with the current makeup of the Supreme Court, do you feel Roe v. Wade is safe?
It's very close. Depending. I think that the way in which the right has been whittling away, it's hard to tell. I mean, Justice O'Connor was the one who, in the end, kept, abortion legal for us, but she was also, part of a decision that unleashed so many restrictions on American women. And so, you can never tell. It's constant vigilance. It's, revealing the consequences of state legislation that the other side is purposely putting through with the intent of challenging Roe. So, things, they've passed trigger laws. They're so confident, in fact, that the Supreme Court will turn their way, that they are also putting on the books trigger laws in the states, which mean that as soon as Roe v. Wade is toppled, these states trigger into banning abortion. And so, that happens quietly. It seems hypothetical. The American public's kind of like, what's going on, a trigger law or whatever that is. So there's a lot of complicated things, but if you look at the design that's happening nationally, we have an unprecedented surging number of anti-abortion laws and restrictions against a woman's right to choose that are going on the books and being introduced in the states. People think that we elect a pro-choice president and, we can rest on our laurels and, maybe make up for lost time. But what happens is that it just goes national and into the states and localized, and it's very, very difficult when the pro-choice movement is lacking funds because people view it as a Roe v. Wade issue and not a state issue. So, it's now a pattern that we've seen with Clinton, Bush, Obama, and it's one we should be preparing for better.
Let's talk about the up-and-coming generation. Are we doing, and when I say we, I mean those of us who do support choice, be they an organization or an individual, are we doing enough outreach to the young people to try to make them understand what's at stake? Because the further we get from restrictive abortion laws, the less of a reality I think it is for young women to really understand what it means not to be able to find an abortion provider, or having to live with the fact that abortion is not a legal option for you, period.
Yeah, we're not a country that thinks in those types of imaginary terms. We usually confront the ugly truth, far too late. And, we've also MTV has done a spectacular job in revealing, how torturous and, full of drama and awful, lack of choices teen motherhood is on their show, Teen Mom and 16 and Pregnant. There was once a whole done of the mushy middle of America and where they fall out, because they changed their view on this a lot. Mm-hmm. And they polled them about abortion, and this electorate came back saying, yeah, it's murder. It'll happen just as much if it's legal or illegal. I think it should be available. These are people, by the way, who want the government out of their lives. They're very religious. And they think it should be legal in cases of rape, incest, to save the life of the woman and for themselves. Mm-hmm. And that's how voters think. And they think that, that in that paradox they can live. Nobody really cares about legalized abortion until they need it. And so, we have a challenge ahead of us as a movement to have people understand not only, why immediately we need to protect this, but why this is legalized abortion and contraception and pregnancy prevention and family planning are, part of who we are as a society and need to be protected.
Cristina Page on the line with me. We're discussing the anniversary of Roe v. Wade and where we stand for abortion rights for this generation and for the next. You're listening to In Deep. I'm Angie Coiro. It's funny you said that, you don't appreciate the right to an abortion until you need one. I know that within my own family and in a lot of anecdotal tales I've heard, because, I did work clinic defense for so long, helping the clients to get into the clinics without being harassed. And every clinic you work at and many, many of the families that you talk to, there's the person who's on the other side of the street handing out biblical tracts, urging the girls to save their babies, give them for adoption, et cetera, and then they show up on a Saturday with their daughter because the daughter needs an abortion.
Yeah, I've heard of those stories, yeah. And, the clinic provides safe services to her daughter. That's what they do. Mm-hmm. And, what's interesting to me, though, and when you were starting to talk about the patient and the experiences of women who are getting these procedures, it reminded me of, Mitt Romney, of all people. And Mitt Romney, was once, he claimed to be pro-choice. In fact, his story about choice was very compelling. His family lost a very close relative to illegal abortion. It was his sister's husband's sister, the only daughter the family had, and it basically destroyed their family. Mm-hmm. And he, during debates, would, basically exhume her spirit and say, this is why I will never impose my will or my belief system on another person on this issue, because, we lost her.
Until it's politically expedient to do so.
And now, over her dead body, we see that she's been erased from his, at least moral compass. He now is, with the whole crew to put women back in the same exact position that his close relative was in. And I think, it just says so much about who he is and, and the mysteries of why Mitt Romney is running for president.
I like that, the mysteries of why he's running. And when we talk about his stance on abortion, obviously you've acknowledged there's a flip-flop there, but the other stances are extreme. We have, Rick Santorum, who we heard earlier in the show, and his stance that even if this is a child of rape, you suck it up, you make the best of a bad situation, and that is the advice that he would give his daughter. I don't think Rick Santorum is going to be our next president. I imagine you don't think Rick Santorum will be our next president. But how much of that rhetoric is damaging just in that it gives encouragement to people who believe that kind of thing?
Well, that's something I often think of because, I wonder, I did the book, which really is about the war on contraception and exposes in great detail, the anti-abortion movement's, efforts to strip Americans of family planning and that are well underway. And I kind of thought, okay, well, once it's outed, they'll stop. The American public will have no tolerance. And, but it only seems to have buoyed them. It only seems to say, well, now we're out. I mean, might as well just do it. And so I often wonder whether or not it's wise to, point out everything that they're doing because it only seems to embolden them. But no, of course we need to know. And I think that it's incumbent upon the media to ask these questions and not be, afraid that it's inappropriate to ask questions about sexual health and rights during a presidential election when most of them have policies that are so extreme and would alter our lives so dramatically on the issue.
Well, one of the other issues that's going to be in front of the next president and next Congress is the extremes in our economic system. And, we've talked a lot on the shows about the disappearing middle class and the difficulty of transcending being in the lower class, moving to the upper class, and how extreme that's getting. There is a rich-poor divide in abortion as well, is there not? I mean, if you're rich, it almost doesn't matter if abortion is illegal. You will get an abortion if you want one. If you're poor, even though technically it's legal now, you still have trouble getting one. Right.
And that's cobbling together the funding, which takes time, and then the procedure gets that much more complicated and complex and expensive. And so it really is, a snowballing problem. Women who are poor or have less access, in many ways to, health care in general, primary care, and contraception, and are more likely to have unintended pregnancies. Obviously, because they have trouble supporting their family, are more likely to want to end that pregnancy. And so, we're going back to the place we were in when, for all intents and purposes, it's not available to one class, and is safely available to another. That's right.
Tell me about what needs to be done now. For those of us who understand that this is still a critical issue, that the Supreme Court is still an issue, that keeping the laws as they stand and perhaps even improving on the laws is still a very live issue, what do we do?
Well, I guess we, as a country need to, accept that, sanctimoniousness doesn't prevent abortion, doesn't prevent unintended pregnancy, doesn't prevent, anything, and that people who truly believe that, they want to see fewer abortions, who are probably, a good percentage of the American public, need to ask, well, how is that done? And whose policies are most wise to support? And I think that the pro-choice voters need to strip away stigma, around sexual health issues, and allow for a public discussion that's fact and reality based. We need to have asked these candidates very honestly what it is that they plan to do with these specific programs like Title X and contraception in state funded contraception, or we just need to begin to have a very honest conversation about this as a country, and lower the volume and bring some reasoned discussion to it.
I want to thank you so much for spending time with me again, Cristina. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you, Angie. I really appreciate you having me.
And as we wrap it up, I should note that Cristina's reference to crazy Catholics was, as I understood it, a reference to the church hierarchy, the church industry, with no comment intended on its individual members. And that is, in fact, a wrap on this hour of In Deep. In Deep is a production of Live from the Left Coast, lftlc.com. Send your thoughts and topic suggestions to feedback@lftlc.com. Next, is there room for civility in political discussions and on the campaign trail? Or do nice guys finish last? Stick around for more here on We Act Radio, 1480 AM, Dumfries, Virginia, Washington's progressive working community.